Good evening and welcome to the Space Needle. We're live on the Seattle channel with Spirit of 62, celebrating the Seattle World's Fair. My name's Feliks Banel. We're going to spend about the next hour or so celebrating the 60th anniversary of one of the biggest milestones in the history of Seattle. And we couldn't have picked a better place to do it than the Space Needle. The World's Fair 60 years ago took what had been a collection of old buildings from the 30s and 40s and 50s, revamped them for a new event in 1962, and for a new century, Century 21. The entire city pitched in, the business community, public service agencies, the federal government, the state government, to create a memorable event. The memory still lingers, and we live with the legacy of it in a good way every day. Now, we're going to have all kinds of surprises tonight. We're going to focus on the history. We're going to talk to people who actually put that fair together and made it a success. We're going to talk to people, current leaders in Seattle, about maybe secrets from the World's Fair that could be applied to the problems we're facing now in 2022. Because the World's Fair was always about the future. Someone much smarter than me once said that Seattle lives in the shadow of its future. And I think that's a good thing. I like being stuck in the future. And I think Seattle is a good place to be in 2022, as good as it was in 1962. Now, I want to thank our host tonight. Joining me is Randy Cote. He's the marketing director from the Space Needle. Randy, thank you so much for letting us be here. And I know you guys are planning all kinds of big events to celebrate the 60th anniversary of the Needle as well.
Yeah, this morning we kicked it off with painting the roof Galaxy Gold. So we got it started earlier during a sun break. As you can see, some very classic Seattle spring showers have rolled in. So we're kind of on pause for painting. We'll probably pick it back up a little bit tomorrow. And then on Friday, we have some contest winners that are going to help us paint it Galaxy Gold. It'll be Galaxy Gold, its original roof color, for the next 12 months until April 21st of 2023. So.
It's always really shocking to see that original color because as someone born after the World's Fair, I think of the Space Needle having sort of the white color it's had, but those colors from the World's Fair are great. And it's also pretty incredible how the Space Needle became the symbol not only for the fair, appearing on Life magazine and in all kinds of TV coverage and film coverage and in the Elvis movie, but really it's a symbol of Seattle. Does that have some kind of special, unique responsibility to be marketing what's essentially the symbol of the greatest city in the world?
Absolutely. You know, the Space Needle's always been that symbol of the future, and Seattle is a cutting-edge city, and it probably wouldn't have been such a technology-forward city without the World's Fair and that spirit of 1962. So whether it's, you know, the $100 million renovation we completed a few years ago that's sort of keeping the Space Needle relevant for the future, or the way that we're engaging guests every day and helping them create those new memories like we have been for the last 60 years, it's a responsibility we take seriously as the people who work here every day, and our, you know, ownership who's taken care of the building for 60 years feels the same way.
Thank you again for letting us do this event here. It's been a childhood dream of mine to host a live TV show from the Space Needle. Probably the first time and only time I'll ever do this, so thanks for tuning in. We're going to get started with our history panel now. We have some very wonderful guests who have joined us. The fair was 60 years ago. 60 years, that's a long time ago. A lot has changed in Seattle, and a lot went into making that fair a success. The fact that so many different aspects of our economy and community pitched in is pretty incredible. And the fact that Seattle Center is still such a going concern is also pretty amazing to me. So we have three people joining us tonight who were there 60 years ago and even before 60 years ago to make the whole thing come together. Our guests are Junius Rochester. He'll tell you, but he was working for the competition during the fair, and his father played a very special role in the fair as well. Also joining us, Louis Larson. He was the director of ticket sales for the fair and then special events for the fair. And also, last but not least, C. David Hubanks. He joined the staff of the fair just after it got underway, but stayed here at Seattle Center for a long time as well. So, gentlemen, I really want to thank you guys for being here tonight. It's wonderful to celebrate this incredible 60th anniversary with people who were actually there. Louis, you've got the microphone there.
I do have
I know we may have to pry that away from your hands at some point. I've been told to be careful. What does it feel like? I mean, 60 years along. What's it feel like being back here tonight on the eve of the 60th anniversary?
In many respects, it's just like yesterday. I mean, so many things that happened that went on during that time that you can never forget. I came as I had two jobs. I was hired as the assistant director of exhibit sales and the assistant director of public relations. And so I had two roles, and there was a lot of reasons for that, which we can go into it a little bit later. But that was, and then I became the director of the advanced ticket sale, which they predicted that there was only going to be $2 million in advance ticket sales. And I told Fred Schumacher, the director of operations, I said, well, I want to take that job on a percentage basis. No, he says, kid, he says, you'd make less money. Well, when we got done, we sold $10 million. I would have been almost a millionaire.
And I know that money was critical.
And then during the fair, I was the director of special events.
I know that money was critical for cash flow in those days before the fair was open for business. Having that money coming in was a huge shot in the arm.
Well, what it did, it paid off all the underwriters 100% of their investment plus a little profit.
And did you ever think that you'd be sitting here 60 years later looking back on what the fair meant and how it all came together? I mean, did you think that far ahead? Even the fair was all about Century 21, but did people actually think about the 21st century?
Well, no, not really. It was Century 21 when I went to work. It wasn't the World's Fair yet. And there was one group downtown that continued to call it the Mercer Street Carnival, and that's what they thought about it.
So Mercer Street Carnival, I mean, that was supposed to be pejorative, right? Like it was just a rinky-dink set of carnival rides. I like the Mercer Street Carnival part of it. I mean, the gateway was a big deal, right? And the carnival rides? Yeah. The actual carnival rides were a good thing, right? Let's talk to Junius Rochester here for a second. So Junius, I know you were, as I mentioned, you were working for the competition. What were you doing at the fair 60 years ago? And tell us about that special connection with your father.
Well, the fair 60 years ago had two main stays for me. One is my father was one of the founders of the idea. Talk about money, Lou. The original amount of money was $5,000 from the Washington State Legislature. That was just little pennies to go in. And my other job was I represented the New York World's Fair in 1964-65 at the Seattle World's Fair. Fair going, fair development, shows like this are more or less in my family because I had family representatives that went to 1893 Columbian Exposition and all the way back to the Judy Garland's show back east. My Uncle Junius sold water back there at that fair when he was about 14 years old. So we have a long history of involvement with these exciting events.
And weren't you, before the fair even opened up, did you sort of earn a special distinction that got you media coverage and sort of a certain kind of notoriety or infamy maybe around this particular, where we're standing right now, where we're sitting right now today?
What about where we were standing?
Yeah, didn't you get special access to the Space Needle before anybody else?
Well, I didn't know the secret was out. I have to confess, I'm in the history of the book, by the way, by Skip Berger, History of the Space Needle. Organizing my exhibit down below in what they called the Hall of Industry at that time, we walked out. I had 4 employees, and we noticed that a gate was open to the Seattle Space Needle. Construction gate, outdoor spiral stairway. We looked at each other and said, should we do it? And the 4 of us, 5 of us actually, walked to the top. Took a long, long time, opened the door at the top, and a guard came over and said, where did you come from? I said, well, we were next door. We saw the gate was open. He said, don't tell anybody that you came up those stairs. Well, of course, we called all the radio stations and all our friends and all our road, and we told everybody. So it's a minor little event, but it was very, very, very cute.
That's great. Let's talk to Dave Eubanks. So, Dave, you've always told me you were either the oldest of the young guys or the youngest of the old guys at the fair.
I was the oldest of the young guys.
Okay. And what was your job when you came here in 1962?
Well, I wasn't going to come to work here.
A little closer.
And
put the mic a little closer to your...
I was convinced that I needed to do that and came to work 2 weeks after the fair started. And was very busy. I've ultimately worked with Lou Larson, who became a director of our division. And probably the most important thing for me was because I had made no enemies and they needed someone to coordinate the closing day ceremonies. And 2 weeks before the closing day, we hadn't even organized it. And they looked at me and said, I think you're going to do that. So I coordinated the closing day event, which was in the stadium. And we thought it was a fairly good show. And then I stayed here until 1976 in the whole reorganization of Seattle Center. And we played to about 40 of the most important cultural and sports. and civic things that went on in the city. Everything came out to Seattle Center, so we had a place for them. And then they started to graduate to new facilities across the city. So the Space Needle and Seattle Center did a lot for this town because we really needed to regenerate everything from here to Pioneer Square, and ultimately it happened.
And there's really no other World's Fair that's ever been held where a civic campus, a civic cultural campus like this was created specifically and intentionally to survive long beyond the 6 months of the Mercer Street Carnival and be that sort of economic engine or that hothouse or sort of a watershed for all these cultural organizations. Major League Sports with the Sonics coming to the Coliseum in '67, I think.
Right on.
How palpable was that during the fair? Was anybody even thinking that far ahead, other than whoever had come up with the idea of building these things?
The people that were involved in redoing the Opera House and being the Playhouse thought about those things. So actually, Seattle, within 5 to 7 years, became one of the great cultural centers in America, which we may never feel that way again because of what we've just experienced. But it drove a huge performance and visual art program for the whole Northwest, from Alaska to the northern part of California.
Yeah, and had the opera being developed as a result of
ballet,
Aida.
Yep. But then came all the sports guys, and let's not forget boat shows, home shows.
Yeah.
They were all here, and that became the reason why we started worrying about building a dome stadium. Yeah. And originally, it was going to be built east of Seattle Center, and it was finally decided it was better to put it at the other end of the city, and it has fluctuated and done great things for that. And yet Seattle Center continues to have a huge audience year-round.
You know, here, I don't know who this question would be for, but looking back 60 years, you know, we know the fair turned a profit. We know that it was a great success in terms of putting Seattle on the map. All these things that I believe you can't overstate the impact of the fair on the city in a good way. But when did you know that it was going to be a success? I mean, I know you sold millions of dollars of tickets in advance. But I also know that attendance wasn't great right out from the outset, like through the cold part of April and May and even into June. The numbers weren't there to really appease all the exhibitors and everybody who was selling stuff on the fairgrounds. There must have been some point when you knew it was going to succeed.
Well, I think the day we hit 100,000, I think that told us that we were on our way. But I have one quick story about the Space Needle. Barbara Bai was Jay Rocky's secretary. Jay Rocky was the director of public relations. My office was down at 158 Thomas, and she came in one day and she says, do you want to go up to the Space Needle? She says, I got permission to go up there. I said, great. And there was nothing but plywood on the floor and very little glass in the windows. And so we got on the elevator and so we go up, and it's a birdcage elevator. We get up and all the workers are here and the wind's blowing and this big gruff guy comes over and he says, well, how did you get up here? And she says, well, you took the elevator. Well, who gave you permission? She says, Harley Farwell. He says, I'm Harley Farwell. So we went back down right away.
It always seems like you guys had a lot of fun at the fair. Is that true? It sounds like it was sort of a great place to work.
It was. We made it enjoyable because we knew it was going to end. And when it was over forever. Yeah. And there wouldn't be another one here.
Now, we only have so much time to talk about this stuff, but I want to cover a couple questions about the fair. Like, I always hear about the adult entertainment section, the Night in Paradise, and the what do they actually call that part of the fair? I'm blanking on what they call that, but where they had Gracie Hanson's show and the Poupée de Paris and these sort of risque parrots. That would be a good show. Risque puppets. What was the deal? Tell me about that. Was that as lascivious as it? Was it as lascivious as it sounds, or was it sort of milquetoast? What was that? The old adult entertainment.
My favorite place was the Spanish Village, and it had the flamenco dancers and the Latuna singers from the University of Madrid, and it was a great place. The food was good, the atmosphere was outstanding, and it was kind of off the beaten path. So you got out of the mainstream of all the traffic, and you could go there and relax. It was kind of like the Oregon Pavilion, which was a small building, but when you walked in there, you could smell the trees, and it had flowing water, and it was just a great place to retreat.
All right. What about that? The one question: was there a sense when you talked about that 100,000 attendance day? That wasn't till August, though, was it, or July sometime, or? It wasn't right away. It took a few months, right? Anyway.
It was during
Yeah.
That's all right.
Canadian.
Let's ask Junius a question. Let me give the microphone. So, Junius, can you talk to what Show Street was like? Did you ever spend any time down on Show Street?
The sense I had of the fair related to all the shows, the ones you mentioned and they mentioned, is that it was a family event. There was something for everybody on these grounds. Some people remember the Spanish Pavilion, where I got a chance to dance at intermission, by the way. I shouldn't make those confessions at this point. And also the great activities that took place in the football field, which became a high school center. Football still is here, still going. But also the small exhibits. People found something to do, something to make them laugh. And of course, the great shows like Stravinsky, leading the Firebird, and Van Cliburn playing Tchaikovsky were just emblazoned into my memory. I'll never forget them. So it was a special, special time. But it was really for family. There was always something going on, and Jackie Souter's band marching right in the middle of everything, handing the baton to anybody who wanted to lead. You couldn't beat it on a fairgrounds. We were more than strangers. We became friends and colleagues on this rather small location.
Okay. How about Dave Eubanks?
We used the Seattle Scottish Boys Pipe Band to move. If we had an impact situation, we needed to move a crowd, we'd just run that pipe band, and the crowd would just follow them, and then they'd disperse a big mass event.
That's great. So Dave, did you
Well,
get...
and Larson was always in the lead. You have to understand that.
Yeah.
But we had bagpipe bands all over this place, and they were magnets, and drew people from all over, and we enjoyed them. And then when the Tattoo was here from Canada, we had more pipers than God could find them.
What is
really
a tattoo?
amazing.
For someone who's never heard of that, describe
I'm
what
going
that
to
is.
let this Scandinavian tell you that.
About what?
The tattoo.
What is it?
Oh, well, it's a extravaganza. Basically, it's a military extravaganza with pipe bands and all sorts of bands. We had the Mounties, the Canadian Mounties, Mounted Horse Patrol. We were there for a week. It drew 12,000 people every year performance. I had seen a tattoo in Vancouver called the Searchlight Tattoo, but they all have themes. They all have a lot of music. It's a great spectacle. I'd like to see us bring one back.
What about the? Wasn't there a water ski show in the Memorial Stadium as well? The Tommy Bartlett. What was that all about?
Ski show, and the outstanding part of that was the guy that could ski without skis on. He'd do barefooted, and he'd go around it. And
Big feet.
Yeah, he had big feet, but you'd look at that with disbelief. But we had to take that out to enable us to have the tattoo.
Okay. Now, hang on to the microphone there, because I wanted to ask you a question about Elvis Presley. I know that gets a lot of attention, the fact that Elvis was here for a couple of weeks, I think, filming outdoor scenes and some interior stuff for his film It Happened at the World's Fair. I mean, everyone remembers Elvis, everyone talks about Elvis. I think everyone has seen that movie. It's not like, it's not exactly Citizen Kane, but it's got some nice scenes of the city in it. It's got some, pretty colors. And I see Jackie Souter's band in there. What was Elvis being here? What effect did that have on the fairgrounds?
Well, he's just a normal guy like the rest of us, as far as I'm concerned. We were really excited and eager to get a performance like that, and so we gave him everything: the police, fire, all the protection. 2 years later, Elvis came and did a concert in the Coliseum, and I was standing with the Colonel Parker, who ran him.
That's Elvis's manager, right? Yeah.
The Colonel looked up in the press box, and they were the Seattle Totem management, because they had a key to the building. And he says, "Who are those people up there?" And I said, "I don't know." And he says, "Get them out of there." He says, "We didn't sell any tickets there." But the other thing he told us, he said, you know, you folks left a lot of money on the table. He said, we were willing to come in and pay for all the extra services that we needed, and you covered it all. So that's one of those things, you know, you never know until after it's done.
So Seattle's hospitality was granted to Elvis Presley and his whole entourage. I guess that's not the end of the world. I don't think we left a little money on Elvis's table. I guess that's okay, right? I think we did okay in the deal, right? We got all the notoriety and the fame for being a location of an Elvis movie. That makes a lot of sense. One thing I always hear people talking about the fair, from all stripes, about this notion of Belgian waffles. For someone who's never had a Belgian waffle, never seen a Belgian waffle, what is it? Why are they such a big deal? First of all, what are they like, and why are they such a big deal?
It's a Belgian waffle that's covered with strawberries and whipped cream. It's about that high. Bert Main, he made enough in the first month on that. He went out and bought himself a big motorhome. But it was, without a doubt, was the most popular food concession in the fair.
Junius, is there any particular, get the microphone from Louis there, any particular food that you recall, or was there some sort of delicacy that you first sampled here at the World's Fair that changed your life in one way or another?
Not the food part. What probably changed my life was that every day was different, and I was here, as they were, I'm sure, every single day for 6 months. I didn't miss a day. Of course, I was running an exhibit, so I had to be here, but I had an opportunity to graze, which means I went from booth to booth looking and eating and seeing and drinking, and it all became mixed up as just one great show. One great show. I don't have any favorites, but there were some Frankfurters that were sold that I really liked. Do you remember what they were? There was a hot mustard on them. A local individual had them. I do have a memory of that.
Now, you guys are all World's Fair veterans, and and this is not to be maudlin, but as the years go by, there are fewer and fewer of you guys around. I remember we did the 40th anniversary at Mohi, and we had a big crowd. I mean, Jay Rocky was still there, and it seems to me there's a real kinship. If you worked at this fair, either in the office or as an exhibitor, there's a kinship that you sort of had kind of a common experience, common understanding. Did that make it easier to get things done in the 1960s and 1970s in terms of big trade shows or other initiatives the city took on, whether it was trying to get a political convention or talking about the Olympics? Did the fair kind of grease the skids for all these different disparate people working together to make the city better or more profitable? Tell me about that.
Absolutely. You know, one of the reasons that the fair was successful, one was that there hadn't been a World's Fair in 21 years. And the other, this was a part of the geography of the country that nobody had seen. I'll give you a quick example. When I was selling exhibit space, I called on the vice president of International Harvester for public affairs, and I made my presentation, and then he kind of leaned back and he says, now, is it Seattle or Spokane that's on the ocean? so we had to do a little geography lesson. And then sat next to a PR account executive for our ad agency in New York, and she was a hiker. She'd done the Poconos and the Alleghenies, and she said, "Oh, I wish I was living in Seattle so I could hike in Alaska on the weekends."
I mean, maybe it's exaggerated to say like how distant Seattle was from, quote-unquote civilization before the World's Fair. Obviously, Boeing was already here. People had been coming through Seattle, for World War II. It wasn't like we were completely off the map or as far away as Alaska. But based on what you've talked about, people not knowing the geography very well, is it possible to exaggerate how distant Seattle really was, or how different Seattle really was before this fair transformed everything? Is it sort of it's almost like apocryphal, or it's an exaggeration, but was Seattle really like a podunk before 1962?
Well, it depends on whether you live here or whether you were from somewhere else. Those of us who lived here thought it was a great city.
Yeah. Junius?
Just add a note on that. My father used to say, Al Rochester used to say, that people came out here and didn't know such a place existed in the United States of America. This is a wonderful symbol of the city, the Space Needle. But there was an earlier one, it's called Mount Rainier. They came out, they saw Mount Rainier, they saw the ferries running back and forth, they saw lakes, salt water, fresh water, hills everywhere. We were built on 7 hills, it's now 6, but never mind, it's a place that they didn't know existed. And my father also used to say that after the Korean War, the soldiers who came back, because he was official greeter for the city, he went down to the capital. Many of them looked around and did not believe such a beautiful town existed, and many of them came back to live. So people came out, looked, absorbed, thought about it, and said, we've seen Seattle, let's find a home right over there.
All right. I have a new primary care doctor. Her and her husband went to medical school in Wisconsin, but she was born and raised in Florida. And they both got jobs at the UW. And she echoed exactly what Junie said. She said, I didn't realize there was a place so beautiful in the United States.
All right. And Dave, let's give you the last word for this part of the panel, because we have a few other things we're going to get to. We're going to invite a couple of you back for our panel about the future. But how did the fair change your life personally? What was the Dave Eubanks in October of '62 different from the Dave Eubanks of April '62?
Well, I stayed downtown, and I stayed here at Seattle Center and watched it grow and watched all the performing arts and the indoor athletics and things that we all dreamt of having. And they were here, and they were at this 74 acres. And it was amazing how we shoehorned them in and how many grew out of just being little ideas to huge ideas. And then ultimately they moved to many of them moved off-site, but never left Seattle Center as a spirit.
Yeah. I want to thank our history panelists, Junius Rochester, Louis Larson, and C. David Eubanks. We're here live at the Seattle Channel, the Space Needle on the Seattle Channel, and we'll be right back after this.
Please step to the rear of the sphere. We can only accommodate 100 of you, a century at a time. First floor. Threats and thresholds, frustrations and fulfillments, challenges and opportunities. First floor, step off into the future, please. The future, please. The future, please.
Welcome back. We're live at the Space Needle on the Seattle Channel. It's Spirit of '62, celebrating the Seattle World's Fair. I'm Feliks Banel, and we're in the middle of an hour-long special marking 60 years since this city was transformed by a 6-month event here at Seattle Center, here in the Space Needle. Transform the city, transform the region. We have about another half hour to go. I have a wonderful guest joining us right now. Greg Gilbert has been a photographer for the Seattle Times for about 55 years. If you ever do any historical research in the archives of the Seattle Times, you see photographs that Greg Gilbert took for pretty much every historic event that ever happened here. But his work as a photographer actually began a little bit before that, actually during the 1962 Seattle World's Fair. And he took a picture of a very famous person. He's here to share that story with us. So, Greg, thanks for being here tonight to celebrate the World's Fair anniversary.
Thank you, Felix. Good to be here.
So, to paint a little picture, I understand you were in the marching band for Olympia High School, and you guys made a special trip to the fair.
We were invited to come to the fairgrounds and perform. And I think we performed like from 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. till noon, and then we had the rest of the day just to wander around. Our bus wasn't returning to Olympia until like 5 that afternoon. And, of course, we had no change of clothing. I had my band uniform on, and I always carried a camera, even back then in high school. And here I'm a 15-year-old kid, and I'm just wandering around the fairgrounds, and all of a sudden here's this crowd of photographers and reporters, and right in the middle of it is John Glenn. Here's John Glenn. I had no idea he was even in Seattle. So I joined in with the scrum of other photographers, and we followed him into the Science Center, and there was on display his space capsule that he had rode in a few months earlier. And he came over to start talking, and so I kind of angled myself around so I could get Mr. Glenn in the foreground and his United States and the capsule behind. But I was like 20 feet away, and I had no credentials. I was worried at any moment they were going to, who's this 15-year-old kid in a band uniform taking pictures. So I didn't get too close, but I had to hold the camera over my head to get a picture, which we call a Hail Mary. And I lucked out, and it turned out actually in focus and wasn't bad. And the next year there was a Scholastic Magazine's competition, and high school photographers, they have pictures of their dog or their cat or flowers. Not many high school kids have a picture of John Glenn, so I lucked out with that. I won an award.
So do you think your career had already kind of found its direction at that point, or was that a big part of it?
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
And then you've come back many times over the ensuing, 60 years, right? And taken other photographs of the Space Needle.
Right.
And I know we have some other images. And you were here, I think it was 1968, when, not unlike what they're going to do tomorrow or the next day to paint the roof, you were here and you took photographs of them painting the roof, correct?
That is correct. They have a shot of two painters out on the apron. This is way back before the era of OSHA and safety harnesses, and so we're just standing out there in the apron. And today, when I look out there and I think of that, I don't know what was I thinking, but in fact, July 10th is when I took those pictures, which was exactly 1 year after I was hired.
So, and imagine you've taken photographs all over Seattle Center for the entire length of your Seattle Times career.
Yep. Yeah, for sure.
Did the fair, being at the fair as a band member, as a photographer, and then coming back as a professional, what's the biggest change you've witnessed in those 55 years as a photographer, 60 years since you came to the fair? It just around the city and the fairgrounds in particular, Seattle Center.
Well, the fairgrounds have miraculously survived. The International Fountain is still there. The Science Center is still there. And the wonderful Coliseum. Climate Pledge now is they've preserved that and saved it. It's going on. So there's a lot of landmarks that have survived. And then the rest of downtown is of course, it's almost as if this area has almost stayed. And of course, the Space Needle too. I didn't mention that. That's survived. But then downtown has changed so dramatically. But there is the little Smith Tower, 42 stories, which when I started at the Times was the tallest building.
Has the character of the city changed much the time you've been paying attention?
Well, yeah. I mean, parking is impossible now. I have to do assignments downtown, and one time it took me about 45 minutes to find a parking spot. And normally, within 3 or 4 minutes, with a little creative engineering and maybe some mental visualization before I get there, there'll be a parking place. But now it's getting really difficult just to park.
So the parking's changed, but what about the character of the city? I mean, you think it's still the same? Could we pull off a World's Fair in, I don't know, give us a few years to do it, 2026, like we did in 1962?
Well, I don't know that we had the same leaders we had then. Joe Gandy was Smith Gandy Ford, and he was a great Seattle leader, and I'm sure that he was behind a lot of the success. And I think, Chris, downtown it's just different. I don't know that people are any less friendly than they were in the 60s, but there's certainly a lot more bicycles.
Yeah. Well, last question then. Now, do you have any retirement plans? Can you break any news tonight about your future with the Seattle Times? Or are you still going to be taking pictures for the 65th and the 70th anniversary?
Well, if they have a wheelchair that I can hold the camera in. But I'm 75, and maybe a couple more years. I do want to travel before I'm too old to put a walker on the airplane.
All right. Well, thanks for being with us here tonight.
Thank
for
you,
the
Alex.
Spirit of 62.
Felix.
It's really nice to see you. The picture of John Glenn is terrific. Congratulations on winning that Scholastic contest all those years ago, and it's nice to have you here tonight.
Thank you, Felix. Yeah, well, you're a great historian, too.
Thank you for saying. We're live on the Seattle channel. It's the Spirit of 62, celebrating the Seattle World's Fair. We have another history panel coming up, and a panel about the future, and a big surprise as well. We're live from the Space Needle, and we'll be right back after this. Welcome back to Spirit of 62, celebrating the Seattle World's Fair. We're live on the Seattle channel, and we're live at the Space Needle, making one of my personal dreams, wishes come true, to host a live TV show from the Space Needle in Seattle. This is great. It's so wonderful to be here, marking the 60th anniversary of the Seattle World's Fair, an event that changed the city for the better in so many ways. And here we are in 2022, thinking again about the future of the city. And we've got our panel put together of some of our World's Fair old-timers who we heard from earlier, plus a couple of the members of the current city leadership. We're going to go from left to right. We have C. David Eubanks, who worked for the fair and worked for Seattle Center for many years. John Scholes, CEO of the Downtown Seattle Association. Councilmember Andrew Lewis, who is on the Seattle City Council and who chairs the committee that oversees Seattle Center. And Louis Larson, who is the last surviving executive from the Seattle World's Fair. You're one of the head honcho big guys, and here you are in 2022. That's incredible. It's so great of you to be around still and to be here with us tonight. So I've been having a really good time the last 30 or 40 minutes, however long we've been doing this, just talking about the past. But as I mentioned earlier, Seattle is a city that lives in the shadow of its future. Someone smarter than me said that. My old boss at Mohi, Leonard Garfield, said that. And I think that's a great way to describe how Seattle is always thinking about the future. I think that's why the World's Fair made sense in 1962 to focus on Century 21. But here in 2022, we're coming out of a pandemic. We're looking at inflation. We've got issues downtown. We've got all sorts of things that everybody's been struggling with. My fantasy is that there's things that were done to organize the World's Fair more than 60 years ago with cooperation between the city and the state, federal government, and by cooperation I mean money, and the business community and private individuals who had a vision to do something amazing. So let's start with you, John Scholes from Downtown Seattle Association. You run DSA, you do all sorts of events and programs and focus on making downtown stronger and more vibrant. Do you think about the World's Fair? Is this sort of in the back of your mind somewhere? What role does the history of the World's Fair play in the work you do every day?
I think it gives us the recipe for success in Seattle. You know, public-private sectors coming together around a shared vision, taking collective action, recognizing that everybody's got a role to play and responsibility, and thinking big. And that spirit still thrives in Seattle today. And I don't think you can point to anything great that we've created since the World's Fair and suggest that recipe didn't have a role to play. You know, whether it's the emergence of South Lake Union or the waterfront park or any of the other big moves we've made in our city, or in combating this pandemic over the last 2 years, for example. People working together, public and private business and city government, state government, that's the formula. We know it works, and that's been our history. And I think it's been true since the World's Fair, and I think the World's Fair was really an inspiration of this is how we do things in Seattle.
Yeah. Councilmember Lewis.
Coming here today, right, and going up that elevator and really seeing, a lot of the city of Seattle and this monument that is a part of this really historic event that happened in the middle of the century and made Seattle what it is today, really is a point of inspiration for what we can do and what we should be doing as a city. And, just the other day I was talking to some folks on the Seattle waterfront about the waterfront park and the Ocean Pavilion and what that's going to do for the connection of downtown and the waterfront and that big asset. We can do big things when we come together as a city, and this can be an inspiration. Big opportunities are not going to be won by modest efforts. Big problems are not going to be solved by small solutions. And this is a reminder of that and an inspiration for us to really rise to the level of the challenges that we're facing.
And given the challenges that we're facing right now, I mean, is it a fantasy for me to think that we can address challenges? Because the World's Fair was about opportunity and sort of happy carnival rides and Belgian waffles and Elvis Presley and stuff like that. Some of the challenges we're facing right now in Seattle aren't happy things. They're tough things around crime and homelessness and economic disparities and that sort of thing. How do we organize? How do we unite as fully as we did for the World's Fair around things that are more sort of challenges than opportunities?
Well, it was also an opportunity to rethink our public spaces and our public assets, right? Like we are standing right now, we are sitting several 100 feet above a massive public pedestrian campus that used to be, like a warehouse district or used to be just any other neighborhood in the city. It is now a world sought-after location for festivals. It's open for public spaces. There's a high school there that I'm proud to have gone to and am an alumnus of. We built and clawed a public space out of an area that used to be a hill, and then after that it was a neighborhood of urban decay. I think that we are faced with those similar opportunities in the city of Seattle right now. When we look at a place like 3rd Avenue in the heart of downtown Seattle, which John and I talk about a lot, like, we should look at that as an opportunity. We should look at that as a canvas to claw out a new civic public space where people, people can walk, people can play, people can work. In an urban public boulevard. It's about looking at those places and seeing an opportunity. That's what the generation that built this campus and built this Space Needle were thinking about. And they weren't limited by any other issue that was facing them. They were only limited by their ambition and their vision. And we need to do that today. There's no reason why we can't.
So how are we going to do it? You've got till 8:30. No, just kidding.
Yeah, I've got till 8:30. Look, I think we've got a renewed civic spirit in this city right now to come back under the leadership of Bruce Harrell. It's been great to work with him on the council over the past couple of months, and I think he has the vision to really reignite that spirit in the 60s. People say, we're going to be like the Roaring 20s coming out of the Spanish flu. In a lot of ways, like this decade could be like the 60s, and we could really work, not, and I want to be careful to say this though, but it's like, but that was a period of challenges, but also a period of reinvention, of growth, of this campus becoming what it is. And I think that we got to take that opportunity to really rise above what our challenges are and think more about what is the future going to be. Because the only limitation is what we can build in that space. It's not what that space is now.
Let's ask Dave Eubanks a question here. You're next. You were here when the fairgrounds were converted into Seattle Center, and then it became this hothouse and watershed for all kinds of organizations, right?
Right.
Do you see any parallels now today?
Well, I do
What's going
actually.
on?
Quite frankly, there was no Pioneer Square. Was just there at the conclusion of the fair. There was a lot of old buildings there. The waterfront was there, and after that, while things were developing here as a cultural and sports and athletic and convention center, which was spilling out over its 74 acres, suddenly, these things started to happen downtown. Skyscrapers started to be built. New retail was happening. The freeway was coming through. Remember, the freeway happened after the fair was over. I remember one day in '63 and realizing I could get on the freeway and drive to Everett on a Sunday. There was, every time you turned around, something wonderful was happening in downtown Seattle. And here we are. I think we're right on the edge of great stuff to happen. And we should not be discouraged. I think we got the right leaders in the right place and and the population, I think, is ready. Very much so.
How about you, Louis Larson?
When Joe Gandy and I were circling the globe selling space, we used to tell potential exhibitors that we're building a great civic center, but we're disguising it as the World's Fair. And there's no city in North America that has anything that left from the World's Fair. Vancouver, BC, New York, Chicago, St. Louis, nobody. And I look around and I think about, you don't go down here and have a cup of coffee, you go have a Starbucks. I mean, your groceries are delivered by Amazon. It's endless. Kraken wouldn't be here if somebody didn't have confidence. And incidentally, when we were selling a space, we were talking about the conversion of the Coliseum to a sports venue that would seat 18 to 22,000 for a National Hockey League team. It was a good idea then, but it only took them 60 years to get here. So, and you got to give credit the men at that time, and too, that ponied up their money right out of their pockets. They had confidence, and I think the confidence is being restored right now with what's happening in this city.
And I love Seattle Center, and I think that it doesn't get enough credit for what an amazing resource it is. Because it was created from the World's Fair, because it's been managed well enough where it's evolved over the years, it tends to reinvent itself every, 10 or 20 years. And it depends on which particular administration's in charge. But I can think of going to Seattle Center at every phase of my life. I'm in my 50s now. I've been there at every age doing something different, and I've had my family there at different ages, and it's just this incredible civic campus. So thank you, and thank you for putting on the fair and leaving that wonderful resource for all of us. I want to ask John Scholes a question here. In the old days, like 25 years ago, the theory was the next thing for Seattle to try was the Olympics bid, which I know was tried a few times back in the 60s and 70s. I think we're past that. I don't think anybody wants the Olympics anymore, at least not right now. Is there some other sort of Olympic-style, moonshot-style civic initiative that addresses the challenges, that creates some kind of long-lasting resource, that kind of does it all the way this event did 60 years ago? Or have I been up in the Space Needle too long today?
Well, I would say we are a big events town now because of the hotel capacity we've added over the last 6 years. You know, we've got the capacity to host bigger events than we could have in the past because of the new convention center addition, because of Climate Pledge, you know, the facilities and assets because of light rail, the airport expansion, and we are bidding for big events. World Cup, Invictus Games, the All-Star Week is coming here in July. So Seattle's a big events town, and we're going to go after and host big events. But I think you're asking, you know, how do we take on, you know, some of these big challenges and opportunities with that same civic spirit that brought the World's Fair here. And I don't think there's a city better positioned to do that. We are one of the smartest cities in the world and country. We're one of the wealthiest. And I think we have a civic spirit that's built on compassion and collaboration and innovation that other places just envy. And those are the ingredients that we need to deploy to address, you know, making sure this is a sustainable place and we protect our environment, making sure we address inequities, making sure we have shared prosperity. And I don't think there's a better region and city better positioned to deal with those issues as we look ahead. And to me, those are the issues of our time, and we have the ingredients and the assets to address them.
And it seems like, you know, there used to be a thing called the Seattle process, which I think grew out of Forward Thrust and Jim Ellis's effort to get buy-in for all these different civic initiatives that were on the ballot in 68 and 69 and 70, and most of them passed. Some of them didn't, notably, you know, rail transit, of course. But it felt to me during the pandemic that Seattle process was suspended in a good way. It felt like there was cooperation between the city and the county on the health department stuff and the city and the state on pandemic-related things, and a certain pragmatism that sort of infected everybody. Bad pun. But it seems like, is that slipping away? Are we losing our pandemic cooperative spirit that we've had for a couple of years?
I don't think so. I think we're building on it. And I think the criticism of Seattle process is sometimes unfair. You know, yeah, we move too slow in certain respects, but point to another downtown that has welcomed a new NHL team, you know, a top 3 arena that's going to open $1 billion waterfront, a new convention center, build light rail and open it across the Lake Washington Bridge, a floating bridge, up north. I mean, the list goes on. So point to another downtown coming out of this pandemic that is going to be doing those things or has done those things over the last couple of years. You can't find one. So we do big things in Seattle, and maybe it takes longer than any of us, you know, would desire, but we get them done.
Councilmember Lewis, tell me about that, the like sort of a silver lining from the pandemic, that spirit of cooperation that I think all of us witnessed. Is there ways to capitalize on that for these other challenges that remain, whether it's crime or homelessness or economic disparity or other things like that?
Well, I think what it really crystallizes is there's broad agreement on what the big problems are that we need to tackle as a city right now, right? And yeah, that's the first part to starting to really work through them. We've seen some really good progress earlier this year in coming together with the Partnership for Zero with the King County Regional Homelessness Authority under the great leadership of Mark Dones, the CEO of that new authority that we've established, that is going to really work on tackling getting the population of people experiencing chronic homelessness in downtown, you know, from around 900 folks down to about 30. And that is the kind of moonshot goal that every major West Coast city is struggling with. It's not unique to us. Like there's major issues with urban chronic homelessness if you go to, you know, Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles. But we have a really ambitious and well-organized goal under good leadership that has come out of that planning. You know, like I was reading an article recently that, you know, the Dutch call it poldark planning. Or polder planning, like literally the process of how long it takes to reclaim land from the sea, right? But once it's done, it's there and it's permanent and it's sustained. And that is the kind of effort that we've been able to build around the pandemic response. I think we're going to be able to build it around homelessness.
All right. There's just a few minutes left here before our big grand finale surprise we're going to have in a moment or two. But My fantasy is that there's a movement called Century 22 that emerges that wraps all these things together, mainly around climate and around issues that we've already discussed, but to create some kind of legacy that we can all work toward the way we did this event 60 years ago. And we all here stand on the shoulders of giants like you, Louie, like you, Dave. It's really cool to share the 60th anniversary of the fair here on the eve of the actual 60th anniversary of the opening day. Here in the Space Needle, there's the city we all love right there behind us. There's Elliott Bay. I can't think of a better way to spend an evening here marking 60 years since the Seattle World's Fair first got off the ground. And I don't think I'll be here for the 100th anniversary. You might be, Councilman. You might be, John. Who knows? But I really am grateful to you guys for coming here and sharing your stories, talking about the past, talking about what worked, and talking about the future, because it's always been about the future, and Seattle will always be about the future. And thanks to you guys, we have things we can point to that give us inspiration for whatever that future ends up being. So anyway, thank you all very much. All right, we're going to get ready here for our big grand finale. Stay tuned if you're watching live here on the Seattle channel. This is Spirit of 62, celebrating the Seattle World's Fair. I'm Feliks Banel. We're live at the Space Needle on the Seattle channel, and we will be right back after this. Welcome back. We're live on the Seattle channel here at the Space Needle, celebrating the 60th anniversary of the Seattle World's Fair. My name's Feliks Banel. Our little show is wrapping up our 60th anniversary celebration. We have one more special surprise for you. I first heard about what we're going to do about 6 or 7 years ago when I interviewed a woman named Maggie Savage. She was part of a folk duo called Mike and Maggie. They'd gone to Whitman College together, performed folk music at Walla Walla, and then they were performing at a little club called 93 Yesler down in Pioneer Square area. And a friend of theirs wrote some parody lyrics to a song, an old folk song about the Galveston flood. And Mike and Maggie made a go of it. They recorded a little 45 RPM disc that I came across many, many years ago at a thrift store, and I kind of had it tucked away. But Maggie was a wonderful performer. She passed away about a year ago. Mike passed away many, many years ago. But their memory lives on in this wonderful song, this tribute that they put together to not only the World's Fair, but to the Space Needle and to audio nudity, which I think we can talk about on a family TV station like the Seattle channel. It's more inferred than talked about directly. So we've got three wonderful special guests to do our grand musical finale. We've got Lisa Brooks, an anchor at KIRO Radio, who I work with, Dave Ross, who's a host at KIRO Radio, and a guitarist named Bob Antone. They're going to take us out with a big musical grand finale here on the Spirit of 62, celebrating the Seattle World's Fair.
Well, Seattle built a needle just to have a little fun and to make a little money for that big deal 21. Now way up on that needle, there's a restaurant going around, and the tourists come from everywhere to see the people on the ground. Wasn't that a mighty day? Wasn't that a mighty day? Wasn't that a mighty day? Great God, that evening when the needle hit the ground. One night a gentleman of renown was looking at the sky, and he chanced to train his telescope on a window lit nearby. And in that window standing there was a maid so fair. But for the hair upon her head, that maid so fair was bare. Wasn't that a mighty day? Wasn't that a mighty day? Wasn't that a mighty day? Great God, that evening when the needle hit the ground. Well, he shouted his discovery about this fair young lass. Yes, and all the men folk gathered round just to see that lady's. Wasn't it a mighty day? Wasn't it a mighty day? Wasn't it a mighty day? Great God, that evening when the needle hit the ground. Well, their eyes were on that window, and their weight all gathered there, when someone chanced to notice that they were sailing through the air. Wasn't that a mighty day? Wasn't that a mighty day? Wasn't there a mighty day? Great God, that evening when the needle hit the ground. Well, it crashed across the fairgrounds with such a gruesome sound that the Colosseum went tumbling and the mess was all around. Wasn't that a mighty day? Wasn't that a mighty day? Wasn't that a mighty day? Great God, that evening when the needle hit the ground. Well, the West Rock kept on rolling right on down Denny Way. It cut the viaduct in half and drowned it in the bay. Wasn't that a mighty day? Wasn't that a mighty day? Wasn't that a mighty day? Great God, that evening when the needle hit the ground. Wasn't that a mighty day? Wasn't that a mighty day? Wasn't that a mighty day? Great God, that evening when the needle hit the ground.
All right. I want to thank Lisa Brooks, Dave Ross, and Bob Antone. I like to call them the old 97.3s. Here live from the Space Needle with Spirit of 62, celebrating the 60th anniversary of the World's Fair, live from the Space Needle on the Seattle channel. Thank you and good night.